Good afternoon and welcome to Lunchtime series, proudly powered by leadershipbydesign.co, where we aim to add value to people's lives. You can listen to us live every Wednesday and Thursday at lunchtime on ebizradio.com, where we talk everything leadership, coaching, and marketing. And you can listen to the Lunchtime series on all your major podcast channels today. On today's leadership segment, we have a wonderful guest from far, far away. It's almost like a fairy tale. But
Yes.
she's joining me all the way from across the seas and lands and everything. She's a conscious leadership coach. Naomi Ali, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Thank you, Kevin. I'm great. Yeah, I'm joining you, different time zone. I think you're 6 hours ahead. I am just east of Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And that's the best way I can locate myself geographically, because if I share where I am, people always, even here locally, raise an eyebrow. It's Curtis or Curtis, and they don't even know where that is. So I peg the local, metropolitan. So
Fantastic. No, that's perfect. So thank you for making the time. And I when we first had our conversation, I was very taken aback by our immediate connection that we had around neurolinguistic programming, but also the impact that you can have in people's lives in the world. And I know that today's conversation is really about enabling the future of leadership. But I mean, you've got a whole bunch of information that you're going to share with us today. So why don't you kick it off with telling us a little bit about you, who you are, and then sort of what we're going to be talking about today.
Sure. So you introduced me as a conscious leadership coach. I am the CEO of NNALI. So NNALI is basically my name, and it's a coaching and consulting business championing conscious leadership, where mindset and well-being thrive for the greater good. So focusing on leaders, mindset, and well-being. So I help leaders lead within first, so they can be present to lead those harmonious teams that lead to exceptional business results. So that sphere of influence effect, that ripple effect, which starts with self in anyone, really. And for me, it's I'm also a certified transformational mindset coach, certified master NLP practitioner, and very passionate about what it is that I am championing, trying to champion and start a movement and influence leaders to adopt this as a way of being, incorporate what it means to be a conscious leader into their existing leadership style, whatever that may be. And so today we're going to talk about what is conscious leadership, why is it relevant now, what does it mean in the future of leadership, and and then share some guidance advice.
Yeah, I mean, I just love the name. Conscious leadership. I think it tells you exactly what it is you're going to be working on, and essentially what it is we need in the world. Right? We need people to be more conscious. We need leaders to be more conscious about the choices they make, about the impact that they have in people's lives. So, I mean. But before we get into the crux of the matter, what inspired you to start your business? Because I know from an NLP perspective, I know that I started out as wanting to fix myself.
Yeah.
So I was on this journey to kind of go, okay, how do I do this for me? But so how did this come about for you?
Yeah, it's that inner journey. That's exactly it. So it's interesting because I think the name of a keynote might be how a divorce transformed my leadership style. So It was a personal crisis that led me on the path of let me start to take a look inward. And because I wanted to heal from that personal crisis, I wanted to come out of it better, not bitter. And I stepped onto the path of self-reflection, self-development, self-improvement. It led me to therapy. It led me to a mindset coach. And that coach told me about NLP and had a training organization. And so then it led me into training and becoming master certified in NLP. And then fast forward a few years, a few short years, a couple of years, a pandemic hit. And I was in corporate for over 20 years, and I was in a corporate communications role. And when that pandemic hit, it was devastating, to say the least, for all of us, especially the isolation piece of it. I struggled with. I love being around my team. I was in a corporate communications function, leading a team and the function for a division of a large organization. And I essentially did not realize I had an underlying medical issue, but I burnt out. And that burnout ignited my mission, which is what led me here. So during that burnout, I lost my resilient self. I lost my tools, those NLP tools. And it was, I describe it as it was in quicksand. And so I really took a step back when I left. I went on sick leave, and then I was laid off. And I really took a look at what were the extenuating circumstances around all of that. And that led to really taking a look at, well, I want to help other leaders avoid what I went through, avoid that piece of this journey. Sadly, we know that burnout is a pandemic within the pandemic. It wasn't only our frontline, but also our leaders, and not a lot of focus really on leader support and leaders' well-being. So that is the mission, to help leaders put themselves first, take care of self through that self-awareness and conscious approach.
So, I mean, when we first chatted, one of the points of conversation was the importance of what does leadership in the future look like, right? And one of the things you so eloquently shared was, we all on about the artificial intelligence, but what about the human intelligence, right? And I suppose that leads us to this next question. So what does conscious leadership mean, right? And I think that whole conversation sort of molds itself into one big point.
Yeah. The beauty about this is that if you were to look up conscious leadership online, I think there's a growing movement, and it may mean different things. People tend to liken it to spirituality, which is fine, which is great. The way I describe it is it's prioritizing self-awareness, and it's mindfulness. It's so important to be present in the moment, and it's led by value-based decision making. So it also involves being fully present. I have this little framework, if you will, of it's think, feel, do. So think consciously, feel that's the empathy aspect of it, and then do is the compassion. So it incorporates leading with intention and purpose, and it includes leading with empathy and compassion. And at the core of that is communication. So communication with self, so the NLP factor, and then communication with others for their well-being. So it's that holistic. I like to think of it as that holistic approach. In terms of that self-awareness component of it.
Do you believe there is a place, I mean, you just touched on it briefly, but do you believe there's a place for spirituality in business? The reason why I ask is what I'm starting to uncover, and just doing what I do and being in the space that I am, is that very thing you're talking about, and really starting with self and connecting with me. I'm starting to recognize how I've changed and how much I rely on my spirituality and my inner, my soul, my spirit, my whatever you want to call it, my consciousness, and understanding the calmness that I need for me to function at the level that I require to be more for the people I work with and the people I work for. So for me, it's a very necessary inside job that I'm doing
Yes.
on a daily basis. What is your take on spirituality in business?
Well, when you asked the question, I immediately said yes. It's like a reflex. Yes, I do believe there's a place for it. I think once leaders really start embracing that in organizations as a whole, and we talk a lot about, when we talk about organizations, people tend to refer to the system and the process. Well, at the core of all of that is human, right? Is human intelligence. And for leaders to lean inward and take that inner look and do that inner work, tap into that intuition, which we all have. And that to me is important. I think the spirituality aspect of it, yes, there's a place for it in business. I don't know if we're quite there. I think the more we introduce practices like meditation. I mean, I
Yeah.
think I saw a title, Chief Meditation Officer.
Yeah.
And I thought, isn't that just brilliant? And
I want to do that. I want to do that job.
right. And to have meditation pods set up in the organization to allow for that time to just go inward and imagine, I mean, just imagine what that will do for the well-being of that work culture. So yes, I think the more people embrace in their personal space, the more they embrace those types of practices, that will then naturally, I mean, I did it at work. I would take a few minutes and have a moment to meditate, but it becomes part of your well-being practice, and it's sponsored by senior level, and they role model that practice. I think there is a place for it. Absolutely. I think it's needed.
So in terms of this conscious leadership, why do you think it's important for leaders and organizations to embrace this now? And what does it solve?
Right. So based on my personal experience with burnout, I started looking at management consulting companies and their various studies on workplace, the state of organizations, the state of workplaces. And every single one of them, Gallup, Deloitte, McKinsey, they all had data to support the fact that, you know, there's this great resignation, the great reshuffle, the great breakup, you know, whatever it may be, there was this exodus of whether it was burnout or just a voluntary, and in some cases not voluntary, exodus from the workplace, and particularly with women in leadership roles, which is quite alarming. And why is it alarming? Because we're working towards equality, we're working towards closing this gender gap, and when you have the very people that you're trying to support and move forward leaving, that may make that gap wider. So we have this exodus of women from the workplace, and not just in the corporate space, but also in the political stage. We saw like Jacinda Ardern leave. There were other leaders, political leaders that have left early. So it's really addressing those types of issues. So at the core of them leaving was it was leaving for well-being, really. So, and not being able to, that resilient self. So I call it like the loss of the resilient self. And the amount of pressure that was put on leaders, both women and men, to deliver and manage, right? That pandemic, you know, when the world shut down and our distractions are removed and you're left with self, it can go either way. So I think the impetus of it and the reason that it's needed now is to really address that well-being point and to really take a look at what will it do if the resilience training is not effective. Then what else? What other measures can we do to mitigate that risk of burnout, that risk of people, just the attrition, and I mean, just the costs too that's involved that an organization has to, the cost from a sick leave perspective, the cost from attrition. So when you have someone, like I say, every leader needs a coach. And I think every single coach in the industry would agree and nod and applaud, because it's that objective viewpoint, it's that objective support, particularly in an environment that leader there may not be psychological safety, which is another discussion and another contributing factor to a pandemic or an epidemic like burnout.
Yeah.
So to answer the question, it's really addressing those workplace issues and challenges that came to light as a result of what happened during that pandemic. And also, I think HBR, Harvard Business Review, came out recently with another study around what does it take, like to how necessary is it, the criticality of a positive workplace culture, and then what does that involve, and then they offered a number of stats around what isn't working. So our workplaces are broken. Gallup came up with a report, our workplaces are broken, and in that report, they pointed squarely, the accountability was with leaders. And I wrote an article around, well, if the problem are leaders and we need better leaders, what are we doing to help them?
Yeah.
So lots of focus put on the leaders to help others, to help their teams and support their team's well-being, which is wonderful, but not a lot of focus on the leaders themselves.
And what I find interesting about that statement is uh, just because a leader is a leader doesn't mean he has all the answers or she has all the answers.
Correct.
Like the leaders they don't have all the answers. So, to be able to have a coach who does, sits, in a complete neutral position to look into that space. I was doing some coaching this morning with a leader wanting to grow in and be better at what he's doing. And that was the challenge that I posed to him. And just because I was outside looking into his world, he completely didn't see what was sort of he was stumbling over himself. That was really interesting, and I think that's a really big point, is that leaders don't necessarily have all the answers. So leaders, like an athlete, would need a coach. Like we all need coaches. Coaches need coaches.
Yes.
We don't have all the answers either.
Yes.
And second, to one of the things I just want to share out of interest's sake, one of the things that has happened in South Africa recently is one of our big insurance companies has, for the first time, appointed a female CEO. And they've made such a big hype. So, I mean, the company is like 100 years old, and so it's been around for a while, but it's their first female CEO. And I'm kind of looking, and because you're in leadership and you work in leadership, I'd love to know your sort of point on this, or your they've made such a hype on the fact that she's a female. And I'm kind of going, guys, it's so 1997 already. Like she's a leader. She's not a female leader.
Yeah.
She's a leader, right? And that broken statement that our business are broken and our organizations are broken. I think that's part of that consciousness, leading with consciousness and saying, who's the best leader? Not, is she a woman? Is she a black woman? Is she a white? Like all of the labels, instead of just looking at consciously, who is the leader that we need for this organization? What is your take on that kind of sentiment?
Yeah, well, you just mentioned one word that I'm still working through. Honestly, it's labels. So, again, this is my viewpoint. In essence, conscious leadership, because I'm a woman of color, and when I talk about conscious leadership, sometimes the question around inclusion and diversity and all of that comes up, which is good. And in my mind, I think, well, that's part of it. It's a given. A conscious leader, leans into that. A conscious leader understands the criticality of all of that. Naturally, it's not a checklist mentality. It's not about labels. So on the one hand, the labels that we're assigning, I find, is problematic, and it's over complicating acceptance, just genuine, authentic acceptance of each other. Authentic acceptance. So with a 100 years old organization that, has this very important, milestone, I agree that, I can actually argue both ways. Like, yes, it's wonderful that you have a leader, a female leader, a CEO of your company, championing the company's mission and vision. That's wonderful. When we assign the focus to the gender, or as you said, to the label, or to the if it's a person of color, that's obvious. But it's really, what is this person's intention and purpose, etc. What are they going to do now that they're at the helm? And then on the one hand, it's great to celebrate those things because it's such a milestone. But on the other hand, you're right. Don't focus on the physicality. Don't focus on the gender. Don't focus on the person of color. It's a given. I don't know if I'm articulating that properly, but
No.
in essence.
But I think that's why I asked the question, is because I think that's a given when it is conscious leadership. There's a given kind of way of being. There's a given kind of way of showing up. There's leadership skill in knowing that my biases are checked, my approaches are checked, my language is checked, my the way of being a leader is important.
Yeah, it's authentic and it's coming from that place. That's why this movement is so important and so needed, because it could course correct. So that gap I talked about earlier, the more leaders, particularly, and I will say particularly, we need more conscious men. I said this, I attended a masterclass last week, and I volunteered to be on the hot seat and to share what it is that I do. And part of what I was sharing is, in these broken workplaces, and I know some people will argue, oh, well, they're not so broken. Well, they are, and we are now in a phase of building back better. And conscious leadership is the antidote. I firmly believe that. So we address these issues. We address these workplace issues that we've had for decades. This movement around, we can talk about equity and equality, but a conscious leader, as we're saying here, I don't want to be circular in what I'm saying, but a conscious leader knows those things by virtue of checking those unconscious bias. Yeah. And the more conscious leaders we have, men and women, I'm really trying to champion, and my niche is supporting women leaders, and that would be in sort of a one-on-one coaching or a program. But really, when it's the group work, group workshops, or group coaching, men are a part of that as well, because it's a we issue.
Yeah.
Right? It's a we issue.
So in terms of all of that we're discussing, why do you think this is important in the future context of leadership? Because we know, the AI conversation is so relevant, and it's so, at the top of every conversation that every second conversation I come across. But I mean, why do you think it's so important to really, top of mind, have this future context of leadership and what that looks like? Why do you think that's important?
Right. So I think when anyone thinks about the future of anything, the future of work, future of leadership, when the word future is mentioned, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like the natural next thought is it's always in the technology. It's about a technology. It's about an innovation, and that's fair. Granted, what I'd like to put on the table is, well, let's actually think about a future where, imagine we just went through a pandemic where everything was shut down, as I talked about earlier, and all our distractions and was stripped away from us, and we were left with self. So imagine, I was having a conversation with some relatives about advances in technology and what would happen if there was, knock on wood, like a solar flare, something that would send us, back to the 1800s where we didn't have these technological advances.
Yeah,
we would be left with self.
Yeah.
What do we do so the human intelligence, the self-awareness piece, the human intelligence is critical, regardless of if your workforce is automated. I mean, we've been through this when we look at the history of how our civilization has progressed in terms of industrialization and technological advances. And now we have this disruptive technology that we created as we create everything. So we tend to look outward. We tend to look at our external environment in terms of what are the ways in which we can improve this. And very little focus, although I do believe there's a movement to shift this, very little focus on, well, what's this technology? What's our inner workings? What is the human intelligence behind, what it is that we do, which is even more critical as we look at our interpersonal dynamics and how they're changing with each introduction, each innovation that's introduced to us. So, and it's rapidly advancing. I think there's been this explosion of innovation within the last 10 years or so. I may have that wrong, but in other words, it's interesting how we're trying to build things to make us more efficient from an external perspective, whereas we really need to take that look inward. And that's important in the future of leadership, because those interpersonal dynamics are going to be so crucial in terms of how we relate to each other and what it is that we're aiming to deliver and produce.
And I'm so glad that you prefaced that with, when we talk about the future, we generally think about technology. Because I'm actually releasing, I think I mentioned I'm releasing a book called The Future of Work is Human.
Yes.
and it's, for me, that's exactly the conversation is like, who am I becoming? And what is this technology, as you're pointing out rightfully, that as much as we have this external focus on AI, it's almost naive to kind of think that we as humans don't need to adapt and evolve, and really check ourselves and what am I doing and what am I changing and how better can I be? It's and that definitely speaks to how leaders show up in the world, and what are leadership, or what is that conscious leadership approach going to be like, and how is that going to be delivered, and how is that going to connect with your people, and why should people stay? And how am I making people want to be in this environment?
Right.
All these things where you really have to hone the skill of, do I have the social intelligence to do that? Do I have the self-management to do that? Do I have critical skills that really help me really create that future of who we as a human species are?
Right. And it's that evolution of humankind, right? Right. It's the evolution of humankind where we need to really focus on. And when I think about what it is I'm trying to do with this work, and you and I know from an NLP perspective that really having an understanding of how we are processing our environment, right? How we're processing information that's coming in, and how we're running that state management. I call it self-mastery. Well, we're being present and mindful of how we interact. That is something that sounds very basic and yet underrated, underutilized. I believe there was a study done, admittedly, I think it was in 2018. I'll have to get the author, I've forgotten her name, the author of the study, but she said that through her research, her study found that only 10 to 15% of leaders are self-aware.
Oh, wow.
Right. And recently, this year, McKinsey came out with their State of the Workplace report, and they talked about the 10 shifts that are needed to transform organizations.
Yeah.
And one of them is leaders who are self-aware and inspiring. Right? I mean, like the data is there, right? The need is there, and it's the answer. It's part of the solution, and it starts with self. It's that accountability and taking ownership and responsibility.
We're currently running sorry to interject, but we're currently running a project that we're currently working with one of my clients, and it's specifically about, how to use language differently, how to be more intentional as a leader. And like literally in real time, these managers have been changing the way they approach their own teams. And the feedback and the stories that you just get from just their own mind shift and their mindset on changing how they actually approach their teams. They are surprised literally by their own responses that they're getting back from their teams. And I'm going, well, that's the point, guys. The point is we need to be, there's a place to manage people, but there's also a place to be able to learn and lead and inspire and coach. And when you get that right, you have a really good balance of what a high-performing team looks like. But I mean, you want to share with us a really nice practical framework on how do we lead consciously? Don't you want to tell us how do we do this?
Yeah, so it just happens to form, this acronym L.O.V.E, which I do love. I think it just fits in nicely. So, most leaders, they want to have that. I say to leaders, take a look at your KPIs and see how you're doing. If you want to have an understanding of where you're at in terms of self-awareness and your influence and impact. So, there's this formula: engaged employees plus client promoters equals exceptional business results, which is great. So if you really want to have loyal customers, you really want to have an inspired workforce and have brand loyalty, it starts with an inspired and engaged leader. So The framework is L.O.V.E, and L is really what we've been talking about today, which is that lead within first. That's what I call it, that inner work, that inner journey. And really to do that, it's those practices such as meditation and mindfulness, so important, lots of health benefits around it as well. To start that process and seeking feedback from others, just that objective viewpoint on self to really start that inner work. And O is ownership. So it's as a leader taking accountability and taking responsibility for mistakes as well as successes, which is so important. And then modeling that behavior to your team. V is values. So a key part of conscious leadership is those value-based decisions. And, it's closely tied to beliefs, and values guide our decisions and actions, as we know. And if you're not clear on how to, what are my values, there's a key question. Actually run this exercise. It's sort of like, this is step one of this exercise, is ask yourself, what's most important to you about leadership? And just write down one word, what comes up, and then ask 2 more times. So then at the end, you'll have 3 lists, and then just go through the list and see what are the common words that come up, and those are your values. And then E is empathy. So it's really the ability to identify with others and understand their point of view or model of the world, and then being able to form that connection. And a key way to do that is to actively listen. So that is the framework in a nutshell.
Yes. That's the L.O.V.E framework. So leading, the O stands for?
Ownership.
Ownership. The V stands for?
Values.
And the E is for empathy.
Empathy. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. And I mean, it's what's nice about it. It's easy to remember, and it's it's a daily practice you can actually practice. Am I leading? Am I owning this? What are my values? Is there empathy? Like, there could be this daily practice as a leader where you're consciously doing this, and you're aware of who you are in that environment. I love that. Yeah. So I mean, I could have a very long conversation.
I know. We should have part 2.
We should. Well, please come back and do more. Advice for aspiring leaders out there. What would you say if you could give them some advice and say, do these things now, and that will make a difference?
Yeah. 100% what we've been talking about is know thyself. Really be open to feedback. Be open to the introspection and self-reflection. Absolutely practice meditation. Practice what it means to be present and mindful. Actively listen. Check your ego at the door. We didn't talk about ego today, but check your ego at the door. That, by the way, was advice that was given to me when I was starting in my career by a wonderful manager. She was a conscious leader in reflection. She was a conscious leader. And she said it to me gracefully and kindly and gently. And I know her intention. She was well-intentioned. But it stuck with me, and it's so true. Check your ego at the door. Also check your energy, right? Like the energy that you're bringing into a space. And read books. One book, there's many, but one that I love for emerging leaders, for new leaders, is The 4 Agreements by Pablo, right? Yeah. And it's just beautifully lined up with what we talk about from a conscious leadership perspective. So know thyself, check your ego, and read books.
Yeah, I mean, and I think with the read books, it's
the learning.
It's the learning, right? And it's learning. I often find that I read about 20 books at the same time. So, because I'm like, I'll read The Values Factor, and then I'll read, Be Exceptional, and like, I'll just go to a chapter and kind of take something out from that and kind of have that and ponder on that. And in 2 days' time, I read something else and I ponder on that. And so throughout the year, I'm reading a whole bunch of books, and it's doing a lot of journaling in between that as well. But it really does just help you evolve and create new ways about thinking around things. So, I mean, Naomi, thank you so much. I think this conscious leadership, how you've unpacked this for us is really amazing. And I love that, it's really understanding the human intelligence and what humankind is actually needing to do for ourselves. If we want to get hold of you, what is the quickest way that we can check you out, get hold of you, and maybe chat with you if we need to?
Absolutely. Best way is to visit my website. So that is www.nnali, that's NNALI.com.
.com.
And I'm on social media, and the links are there as well. They can
links
follow me.
So everything's going to be in the description boxes, guys. If you want to get hold of Naomi Ali, she's you can go to NNALI.com, and we'll put those links and all of her links, LinkedIn, Instagram, and TikTok in the description boxes below. She's a conscious leadership coach, guys, and yeah, and Naomi, this is an open invitation. Please come back and talk some more.
Wonderful. I'd love to. I'd love to.
Thank you for being here, and I'll chat to you soon.
Awesome. Thank you, Kevin.
Cheers for now.
Cheers.